Well, one of the things that we think we need to talk about that's really important for people to understand is a discussion on emotional affairs. But before we could talk about emotional affairs, we need to talk about what an affair is, and we must begin with the definition of adultery. There are a lot of different opinions about what constitutes adultery, and the truth is some of those differing opinions are ongoing today in living rooms, pastors' offices, even among therapists. And disagreement about what it is you're dealing with as a couple can complicate the healing process greatly. And that is never more true than in the case of an emotional affair. So we want to make sure we're all on the same page before we start discussing specifics about emotional affairs. And let's define adultery. We believe that acts that fit into the following 4 components define adultery. And the first component is the breaking of vows or promises. We primarily make 2 vows or promises when we get married, and the actual words may change, but the promises we make are universal. And we can pretty much assure you that the person you married heard these 2 promises, and certainly the Bible supports them. The first promise is that the person you married is now the number 1 person in your life, through various circumstances, health, wealth, happy, sad. And the irony is it doesn't really matter why you married. The fact is that you did marry, and those promises were heard. The second promise that you make is that the intimacy space of the marriage relationship is reserved only for the 2 of you. This is that vow to forsake all others. And any time we put another person in the relational space we promise to our husband or wife, be it sexual or emotional or both, it is illegal contact, if you will. We have violated trust, we have broken our promise, we have betrayed our spouse. So the first and primary component in the definition of adultery is the breaking of those 2 promises. Now the second component is deception, called the hallmark of infidelity. It feels very personal because it is. It's very intentional. The third component is that it shatters the safety and security once found in the relationship. Trust is immediately destroyed, and not feeling safe is huge. And the fourth component is that it threatens the attachment between the couple, and it overwhelms a person's ability to adapt. Now, please note that these 4 components are not specifically sexual. They also apply to what is often called an emotional affair and can happen long distance, over the internet, and does include porn. Any behavior or relationship that fits these 4 components is adultery. The breaking of vows and promises, the deception, the shattering of safety and security in a relationship, and the threatening the attachment between the couple. So let's answer the question, what is an emotional affair? What turns a friendship into an emotional affair? Dr. Shirley Glass, a recognized expert in infidelity who did some of the most thorough research available, says that there are 3 components necessary for an emotional affair. And the first one is secrecy. It's not that the relationship is a secret. It's the secrets being shared. It's the fact that they are hiding feelings and emotion. In fact, the spouse may often know about their friendship, or at least they think they do. But the affair partners start hiding facts, the content of conversations. And one of the questions to ask yourself is, would we be embarrassed if my spouse heard or saw what just happened in that meeting?
You know, that's a great question, I think, for just people in general. I've had a bunch of people come to me in the past, guys usually, and that have asked and says, well, what makes it an emotional affair? Why is it? And I'm just kind of elaborating on what you just said. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things that I will ask is, you have any secrets? And they say, well, no. Well, no. Now think about that for just a second. If you had lunch with your friend, and you had a conversation with that friend of yours of the opposite sex, was there anything shared in that lunch that might have been something that, you wouldn't want your spouse to have heard? Something in there, and that makes them think. And I said, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're in an emotional affair at this point. But one of the things is that is kind of the acid test. If you're starting to have secrets with your friend, mm-hmm. then you want to definitely, it should be put in check at that point. That's a real danger sign. So
Yeah.
One of the things that Mike shared with me is that he didn't feel that he was keeping secrets with me when he did have an emotional affair. But what he started doing was lying by omission. So in his head, he did not think he was keeping a secret. He just wasn't telling the whole truth.
Yeah.
Right.
So
right.
she, Joe knew we were having lunch together, encouraged it. Would I lie about what we talked about? I would tell her some of the things we talked about. I just wouldn't tell her all the things we talked about.
That's right. And it doesn't have to be sexual at all. That's
Right.
the
Yeah.
big thing.
Well, and I think that's the big secret, is I think that's where the enemy really gets in your head and starts playing with you, is because you start justifying it. Because,
Yeah, that's the word.
Face it, you are being emotionally fed by this other person, and it feels good, to have somebody else paying attention to you and hanging on your every word. And that in itself is very dangerous. But as you are being fed by this other person, then you start to do this justification thing in your head where you start going, well, it's just a lunch. We're not doing anything. We're not saying anything wrong. We're certainly not having sex. We're not doing anything like that. So it's perfectly fine. When really deep down in your heart, if you really, really take a long, deep look at yourself, are you putting yourself in that person's path? Do you want to be in that person's path so that they do have the opportunity to feed you emotionally? And if they do, man, that in my opinion, is an emotional affair.
Because the sad part is that it is feeding you emotionally, but it is not something you even want to recognize yet.
Right. Because you want to preserve that relationship.
Right.
Rick Reynolds from the Affair Recovery Center in Austin, Texas says, when it feels like your family is getting in the way of your time with your friend, you'll know you have finally ignited an emotional affair.
Wow, that's really good. Yeah.
So the first component is secrets.
Yeah.
The second component is emotional intimacy, which is what you were referring to, Joe. It's not that we as human beings can care about another person. Of course we can.
Right.
That's how God created us. It's about what we share with that other person. We are investing more emotional energy in the friendship than in the marriage. And we're receiving more emotional support and companionship from the friendship.
And for Joe, the emotional affair was much more, I don't want to speak for you, but much more hurtful than the physical affair, because you can have a physical affair with somebody and really not care about them, not share your heart, not share your feelings, but that doesn't happen in an emotional affair.
That's right.
So for us, it was much more devastating.
Yeah.
And you would have thought I would have learned.
Yeah.
You would have
But
thought so.
it still at that time was not.
No, I know.
And what we're going to get there, Mike.
Yeah,
I know.
And,
I know.
and I really think that another acid test to this, and it goes to the secrecy thing as well, is let's just say, I like to speak in illustrations. Okay, let's just say you had some really great news that you have to share. You got a raise, you got a new job, you got something like that. Where do you go first? Would you run to your friend? And want to tell them first, or would you go to your spouse and tell them? And and if you're running to your friend and that's what you desire to share first, you're in the danger zone.
Yeah, when your friend knows more about your marriage than your spouse knows about your friendship, you're in trouble. When you have, like Gary said, when you have something to share and you think of your friend first, and what comes along that path is soon you're sharing with your friend about your marriage and its problems, and it just goes downhill.
Well,
from there.
I think that's the thing that drew Mike to this lady, was that they shared a common bond that I did not share in. And
Exactly.
at that point we were changing churches, which was very hard for me. And she went to the church where Mike wanted to go. So they got to share in that intimacy, and I was odd man out.
Exactly, yeah,
So it was 2-1. Joe was the one
that's right.
in that particular issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's amazing how obvious that is to the spouse,
Right.
to the betrayed spouse. They know when they're left out of that circle.
Yeah.
Well, the third component is sexual chemistry. Gary Chapman calls it the tingles. And that's normal. As men and women, we are wired this way. It is not a sin to be attracted to someone else. But it is a danger signal for those of us who are married. This is an indication that we need to limit contact with the person who elicits those tingles, unless we're married to them. And here's kind of an ironic thing too, is admitting that attraction only inflames it.
To that person.
To the other person.
To the other person.
Yeah, not
Right.
admitting it to your spouse.
Right.
Okay.
I have to be careful around you. Oh boy, if I wasn't married,
Yeah.
you know, if you
Yeah.
think of what you're doing, if the person you're confessing to, your friend, had no idea you were attracted to them,
Well, they do.
now they have
sure
no
do
doubt.
now, yeah.
And after admitting the attraction, therapists tell us it usually goes further down the hill
Very rapidly after that. Yeah.
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 So, an emotional relationship that fits these three criteria, by definition, is adultery. And Dr. Glass says this: infidelity is you took something that was supposed to be mine, which is sexual or emotional intimacy, and you gave it to somebody else. Spouses perceive an emotional relationship with these three components: secrecy, emotional intimacy, and sexual chemistry. Spouses perceive that as an adulterous relationship. It is an affair. In fact, in affairs that have both emotional and physical betrayals, spouses often say that the emotional aspect of the relationship is actually worse than the physical sex.
I can say that knowing that Mike did have both types of affairs, and the emotional affair was the hardest. It was the most painful. The sexual affair was the one that made me the angriest, however.
Yeah.
Because he'd already experienced the one.
What was the difference, Joe?
Well, for me, and it took me a long time to figure this out, because first of all, we didn't even think the emotional affair was a big deal, was that Mike took her into that intimacy circle emotionally. She became his best friend during that time, where he could confide in her and she could relate to him in a place that I had no place.
Right.
And so when he did have a sexual affair, that was hard. But it was more about deception, I think, and lying and all those ugly things. The sexual part to me was like, because I believed it was not emotional at all. It was truly sex for sex sake.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that you just mentioned, something that could be misunderstood, I think, by some people out there, is you said, well, when we went through the first affair, the emotional affair, we just thought it was no big deal.
We did.
Okay. But did you think, because this is what I've heard from other people, did you think that the world around you is telling you to minimize this because, well, they never had sex, so, you know, let's hold Mike up, you know, on our shoulders because he's now our hero, you know, because he never did have sex with this woman. He held back on that. But didn't you feel total betrayal?
Total betrayal.
Yeah. And so you start to question yourself, like, why am I feeling like I'm crazy?
Well, and Mike pretty much told me I was.
Yeah.
Right.
So I was fed that language the whole time. You are making a mountain out of a molehill here.
Yeah.
I remember in the early stages of this ministry, you know, we did not put the emotional affair it was at a lower level than a physical affair, you know, and then of course we could always say, well, you know, the physical affair, there are the dangers of pregnancies and STDs and all those other things that you don't have with an emotional affair, but the betrayal is the betrayal and it cuts just as deep.
Yeah.
And in some cases we think deeper. In fact, you recall the first 3 or 4 groups that we did after we started Hope and Healing, I didn't even tell you guys.
Right.
We didn't know about your emotional affair.
You didn't. No. No.
Yeah. Which is one of the reasons why we're doing this.
Exactly.
Because I think we're better about it as a culture now than we were. But there's a lot of pain out there that's never been addressed because it never became sexual. And also, things didn't change. Changes weren't made to bring back that safety into the marriage.
Yeah, I really believe, and I don't know this for sure, but I believe that if we would have addressed the emotional affair initially, if we'd have gone counseling, if we'd have unpacked the baggage, if I would have realized the hurt that I had put Joe through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I don't think I would have had the second affair.
No, I think that's a really safe assumption.
And you and I have both talked about that. I think that your second affair and my second affair, I think, was probably God saying enough is enough.
Yeah.
You get real here.
Yeah.
Gary
That's
and
right.
Mike.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Gary more than Mike, but
Yeah,
yeah.
of course. Yeah.
No,
I call it the 2x4 to the
2x4
forehead.
to the
You know, I
forehead.
mean, that was
Yeah.
God just going, "Wake up,
Yeah.
Gary."
Yeah.
You know, look what you. Yeah.
Black-hearted son of a gun.
Yeah. I know.
Well, in our opinion, an unchecked emotional affair will eventually become physical most of the time. We know that is not always true, but most of the time it will.
And I do believe that, and I feel like the only reason that Mike's partner and he did not take it sexually is because of her place in the Christian world.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, betrayal by your spouse is betrayal.
Yeah.
It is huge, and if you've watched other videos on this website, you know that we consider the revelation of adultery comparable to the sudden death of someone you love. The recovery process will be that intense and long.
Well, it explained for me, which I had no understanding of during the time, but as we've progressed through 20 years of doing Hope and Healing weekends, is that the anger that I felt towards Mike's second affair was really beyond belief.
Yeah.
I mean, I exploded. And it's because I had suppressed all the feelings of rejection, abandonment, all those feelings that I felt that he chose someone over me. And no, they didn't have sex, but he did share his heart and
That
who
was
he
huge.
was. It was huge.
That's right.
You know, and those feelings that you had were shoved down for 15 years. You had to
Yeah.
swallow that,
Yeah.
thinking that, well, that was no big deal. He didn't really,
Right.
but he still betrayed you. And I
Yeah.
mean, that to me is, I don't know
Yeah.
how you did it, and
I
it
don't
sure
either.
explains the anger when
Yeah.
the second one comes
yeah.
along.
And actually, the anger I am thankful for, and it's terrible. I mean, it says something about my character probably, but that it took that to get my attention. So when, when she talks about, when Joe says, I was so angry, good.
Yeah.
I finally understood the hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why when we say this to the unfaithful spouses,
Right.
it's so important that you spouses share what you're
Right.
feeling going through this.
Exactly.
Don't
That's-
shove
that's
these
right.
feelings down because you don't want to ruin the night. Or I always morgue him out every
Yeah,
time we
yeah.
talk about it. Is that all we ever talk about? Don't go down that rabbit hole. It's so important that we see that so that we can see it with empathy and compassion, and we can get. Here I go again. You can get behind your eyes and be able to truly feel that and make a change in your life to where you're. God's using this to clean out your marriage. Let Him thoroughly clean it out. Get it into the light.
And that's cleaning up both our lives.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's
Yeah.
exactly
Really is.
that's exactly right.
Both of our lives.
Yep.
So what's the difference between a physical affair and an emotional affair? The sexual acts shared by the betrayers.
That's it.
They are
Right.
both affairs. They are both infidelity. They are both adultery. They are both betrayal.
Right.
Now, like Gary mentioned, the consequences of a physical affair can be greater, but the pain of the betrayal to the spouse is just as bad and just as damaging to the marriage.
Well,
they need time to heal.
They can be greater, but you can say that if you have a physical affair, maybe it won't result because you didn't have that emotional attachment. It might not result in divorce, but the emotional affair can result in divorce. So I think they're
Absolutely.
all individual, and they both have terrible consequences.
Devastating.
Devastating.
And the one
consequences.
common thing is that betrayal.
That's
you know,
correct.
you are being betrayed, and I don't care if it was physical, emotional, or whatever. That cuts deep in your
right. It
relationship
does.
when you're lied to like
Yes.
that. Yeah,
And both of them are purposeful.
yeah, that's
They're
right.
purposeful.
yeah.
And it does feel purposeful rejection.
Yes.
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 Yeah, yeah. Both wreak the same havoc.
Oh.
Exactly.
You know, there is a significant and severe injury to the marriage. Both destroy trust. Both give Satan just as much of a foothold.
Right.
They
Yeah.
hand him the tools and the power to destroy relationships.
Yeah,
And the doubt. Satan is
doubt.
good at planting doubt.
yeah,
And that's where it started.
yeah.
But here's what often happens when a husband or a wife approaches someone with concerns about a possible emotional affair. The accused denies that anything happened. And in fact, many believe that if they didn't have sex with another person, then it wasn't an affair.
Yeah. Well, we covered that pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if feelings are acknowledged, the message given to the one betrayed is, well, at least it stopped before
Yeah.
something happened.
Yeah, wrong.
That
Betrayal
message
happened.
is delivered by the unfaithful spouse and often by those that they go to for support.
Yeah.
The bottom line on emotional affairs is that often the relationship is downplayed, the affair is not acknowledged, and the marital injury is not healed.
So who's happy about that? Satan's happy about
Yeah,
that.
that's
Satan's
right.
happy.
He's a deceiver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because something did happen.
That's
Yes,
correct.
and I
And it
think
was
that
called
was the
betrayal.
Yes, and that's the thing I think I was screaming most of the time.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say something did happen. It was like you broke my favorite vase and it was gone from our lives and you cleaned it up by shoving it all under the rug. But every time I walked over that rug, I felt that brokenness.
Yes.
And when Mike would just say, no, that lamp wasn't there.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like you really do start losing your mind.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you, Mike and Joe, for sharing from your own experience. But we've heard this from so many other couples too. If you downplay the reality of the betrayal of an emotional affair, it severely impacts the healing in numerous ways. And one of those ways is it denies the offended spouse the opportunity to grieve and heal.
Yep.
Now, a traumatic event has occurred for the spouse. In Mike and Joe's case, it was for Joe. She was betrayed by the person she trusted the most. Their whole world, safety and security, had been threatened, foundation rocked. But downplaying the affair for the spouse makes it so they are unable to process the trauma.
Right.
And in all honesty, when I said nothing happened, that's true. That's true. But why I was doing that, if I need to be honest about that. Why I was doing that was self-defense.
Yeah, it's also-
self-preservation. It was
Yeah.
self-serving. It was
Because
It
you
was.
knew something
Oh
happened.
yeah,
Yeah.
I did.
Absolutely.
I did.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, which is typical for offending spouses.
Absolutely.
It is.
Well,
Yeah.
the culture encourages it
Yeah.
almost.
Exactly.
Well, I had an out.
You had it
Yeah.
out.
And
It was like it's like the guy that commits a crime but gets off on a technicality.
Yeah.
I really committed that. I really committed that crime, but you mishandled the evidence.
That's
You
right.
did.
And
That's why
chances are
you
he'll
can't
be
convict
right.
me. You
He'll
can't
be right
convict me.
back there
That's
again.
correct.
That's right.
That's
correct. right.
If you don't pay the consequences, if you don't see the depth of what you did, then there's a high chance that you're going to come back and do it again.
It reinforces the
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
It does, and that's and so that's why one of the things it's and I just really want to say this to the offending spouses out there that might be getting counsel from someone to say, oh well, it never went beyond that, it never became that, don't you have to give them the opportunity to do this, to work through this betrayal, to work through that grieving process we've talked about, the loss that they've incurred. That's all part of the puzzle that they don't understand, that you need to give them the pieces to. So don't just shut them down and say, hey, we never had sex, so we never had an affair, now we're not going to talk about it ever again. That's not going to work. That's just not
Well,
going to work.
if we downplay the affair for the betrayed spouse, it makes it so that and I think I said this before, they're unable to process the trauma. And if everybody around them acts like nothing happened, then they begin to question their own reaction.
right.
Am I overreacting?
Yes.
Is my pain and fear abnormal? Maybe I'm the one that's crazy.
Yeah.
And we've seen this many times in the couples we work with. The spouse starts to use all their energy denying the emotions and the energy and the injury rather than working through them, and they shove it down.
And
Exactly.
then the offending spouse thinks that, well, I can do that again because I didn't get caught. There was no real consequences. Hey,
Yeah.
there we go. Yeah.
Even though they may not even look at it that way,
Well,
in the foreground of their
consciously,
thought,
Yeah.
but it's just like if you never got burned touching the burner, you'd have every intent to go
That's
back
correct.
maybe again.
Right.
You just think, well, there is no consequences to this. So
Well, it's just like raising kids. If you make a rule and then you don't enforce it, what do the kids
There's
learn?
no rules.
Well, shoot, I don't have to
That's
listen.
right. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if we downplay the reality of the betrayal in an emotional affair, it often impacts the healing because it denies both the betrayer and the betrayed the opportunity to repair the damage done to the marriage.
Yep.
Right.
the marriage relationship has suffered a severe wound, and trust has been lost. And trust is lost in an instant, but it's not rebuilt that way. And we
That's right.
talk more about that in our trust video. But if one party, the unfaithful spouse, doesn't even recognize that they were unfaithful or denies that the injury was significant, they're not going to do the work required for that rebuilding of trust and reconciliation.
No.
And the wound between the couple doesn't heal, and the hole vacated by the trust will only grow bigger.
That's exactly true.
And we've had people that have not addressed issues like this in 50 years.
That's right.
Later, they're dealing with it and they can't figure out what went
Why?
wrong.
Figure out what
I mean,
wrong.
we had
Yeah.
we had one couple. I remember the one couple, and I think the incident happened 50 years prior.
Wow.
They never ever addressed it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Never,
and they
ever worked
wonder
through
why
it.
the pain is still
That's
there.
correct.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
it's been 50 years. I should be done
Yeah.
with this.
Yes.
Can't figure out what happened. You know.
Yeah. But pain doesn't go away.
No, it does not.
So, downplaying the reality of a betrayal of an emotional affair impacts healing also by denying the unfaithful spouse the opportunity to realize what they've done and what it costs.
Yeah.
And I like that you use the word opportunity because at the time it does not feel like an
No.
opportunity.
No, it certainly doesn't. But something happened and something needs to change.
Right.
And you're not going to have the opportunity to do something different in the future.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. So, most people are surprised to find themselves in an emotional affair. They don't plan it, it just happened. But the fact is, that's one of the most effective motives for change.
Right. But it is the same baby steps that we talk about
Yes.
in a sexual affair.
That's right. The recovery is very similar.
Yes.
But the
And
baby steps into the emotional affair is the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
that's what
yes.
Joe was
yes.
saying.
Yes.
And
yes.
that's,
Yeah,
that's why hedges are so important.
That's exactly
because
right.
these hedges keep us from those baby
right.
steps.
That's right.
See that and if you guys haven't, people looking at the videos haven't seen the hedges, you'll see that, and a lot of people will look at our hedges, and go, "Pff, that's a little over the top," or whatever.
Paranoid or
yeah,
what?
but
Yeah.
the thing of it is when you walk through something this devastating, this traumatic, and you put those hedges in place, the alarms for those baby steps that we were just talking about moving into the emotional affair, those alarms start going off so much earlier. You know, you think, whoa, that was it. I think one of my hedges was the fact that I forward Mona emails if there was anything flirtatious, in an email. You know, that is, I would have never thought of that before. I would have never thought of that at all. You know, but the sheer
Right.
fact that, that we do that now, it's like that alarm's going off because we're not going back there. We never want
right.
to take this chance again.
And you can't go back to before it happened. You know, you've got to give up all hope of having a better past. I remember the one guy, Gary, that at one of the intensives, and he said, "Mike," he said, if you ever find out about a time machine where I can go back to before I made that decision, please let me know. He said, I'll pay anything
Anything.
for
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Because
When
nothing
we
is
all-
worth the pain.
No,
It's
Yeah.
not.
It's not.
It's
Yeah,
not.
yeah. It, if you have to walk this path, which none of us wanted to or would ever want to again, and our hearts go out to anybody who's walking
Absolutely.
it. The realization that what you did cost someone else big time is relevant. It's essential to the healing. And if you are unable to recognize that, you're not going to put the energy and effort in. You're
No.
going to revert to, well, nothing really happened, or at least it stopped before something happened. But the damage won't go away. It just
right.
gets buried for a time and it'll come back. So here's another issue, and I've talked to many people on this one. If you're a couple and one's accusing and one's denying, who do you believe?
That's
What do you do? Well,
And it depends
yeah.
on if you're verbal and nonverbal, because that played out in our lives so easily. Because I'm more nonverbal than Mike. Mike is very verbal, and so when he said, "No, it didn't happen that way," if I didn't argue that point, and I said, "Oh, then it must have been
Okay.
what he said."
yeah.
So,
yeah.
you start really, and we have so many ladies, all kinds of people who come to Hope and Healing who do feel crazy.
They do, yeah. And that's really true. But if you're a couple and you're sitting there going, well, he or she always accuses me and I've never done anything, I would encourage you step away from that argument because that's not relevant. Here's what's relevant. It doesn't matter who is not seeing truth. Because what you've just communicated very clearly is that the marriage has a serious issue and needs help.
That's right.
And I tried to convince Joe, confess, that she was crazy. It was part of my denial of the fact that there was something. And survival. That's correct.
Right.
Survival.
Yeah.
Well, the alternative would be you'd have to admit to the fact that you were sinning.
But the alternative to not addressing it and giving it the importance that it deserved was 17 years later,
Right.
Or 13 years later, the sexual affair that almost destroyed our marriage. Well, the first one actually almost destroyed our marriage. But, if you don't take something seriously, I mean, let's say it's a medical issue, and it's a stage 1 cancer, and when do you want to get that cancer? When it's stage 1. You don't want to wait till it's stage 4 because then it might be not able to be cured and healed. So these are things that are, they're so important.
Yes.
And there's so much misinformation out there.
Right.
And the world paints it as kind of okay. Come on, that's the way things happen now.
Yeah,
they don't need to.
It is. And I've heard many people state that marriage counseling statistically doesn't help that many people. And if you talk to therapists, there's probably some truth to that statistic, but the problem is people wait so long and get so deep and into such convoluted situations before they ever get to marriage counseling. So I really encourage people, please, again, like that argument, yes, I did, no, I didn't.
Right.
Okay, leave that argument. Because what you've both just clearly admitted is we got a problem.
Yeah.
That's right.
Go get the help you need.
Yeah, or people are telling him, cut your losses, get out of this.
Yeah.
You can't have ever a healthy marriage given what's happened, and that's not true.
That's right. That's right.
It's just not true.
Not true.
The irony is that sometimes extracting yourself from an emotional affair can be even more difficult than from a physical affair, especially if you've rationalized that nothing really happened.
And if it involves your whole family and your whole social network, I mean, then it's blatant out there.
And it's blatant. Well, your friend may even want the friendship to go on because nothing's happened.
Exactly.
Some of us who come alongside say, well, hey, they caught it before anything happened. Don't freak out and overreact.
Right, yeah.
It's as if we're all hoping if we say nothing happened loud enough and long enough, that'll make it true.
Right.
They don't have the motivation or the support to go through the difficult process of ending that friendship. We need to be willing to ask the hard questions and give the hard answers because a marriage impacted by an emotional affair has been severely damaged. So we need to help them heal.
And when you say that, Mona, what you're saying is that the trust has totally been broken.
So how do you heal from an emotional affair? Well, the same way you do from a physical affair. Because the only difference between a physical affair and an emotional affair are the sexual acts shared by the betrayers. Here's the first thing we recommend for those who might be treading close to an emotional affair. Very simple, easy to understand. Run.
Yeah.
R-U-N. Run, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Run home and tell your spouse.
Yeah.
Now that sounds
That's
crazy.
hard. Yeah.
But if you're going to build trust, and if you think that trust is being broken in any area of your marriage, that will start building it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, there's a lot of people that would say, well, I'm not going to go home and admit,
Exactly.
even if I'm hitting all the check boxes on your little tests here, I'm not going to go home. That'll just blow the whole thing out. Well, that tells me that in your relationship, it may not be a very safe place to go there. So that that would be like maybe counseling would be a good idea for you guys.
Exactly.
Just so you can learn to communicate here.
Well, if there are issues with safety, but why would we say that? Why would we say run home and why not let sleeping dogs lie?
Well, you're making the safety sound like they're going to be in some sort of a a physical abuse kind of a thing. I'm just talking about a safe place to bring home bad news, and like you're going to jump down. Wow, what'd you do to bring this on? Kind of a thing. You need to learn to communicate through that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So why confess an attraction to your spouse? The confession allows for three important things to occur. And one is that it diffuses the power of the secrecy.
Amen.
The thrill of a shared secret is now a threat to your family. And fantasy has been exposed to reality.
Well, our mutual counselor, I don't know if it was original to him, but he used to say that sin can't stand the light.
That's right.
It's like I don't know if you have a bacteria there. There's certain things you put a bacteria under and it will kill it.
Cockroaches,
whatever it is. But that's what sin is.
Yeah.
And if you're giving Satan a hold over your life when you keep secrets from your spouse. You do, and it's deadly. Satan's he's a sneaky guy, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Well, that confession does diffuse the power of the secrecy, but it also prevents escalation of the relationship because the steps you take now prevent progression. Mike admitted before that he probably never would have stopped if his friend hadn't confessed to Joe. Another reason, besides the fact that it diffuses the power of the secrecy and prevents escalation of the relationship, is that it provides the motivation to immediately end the relationship and begin working to rebuild with your spouse. You have revealed a hidden wound, and now the two of you can work together to heal it.
And you can help each other through it because in Mike's situation, he really didn't feel they'd done anything wrong.
Right.
So the minute he would tell me that, if he had confessed, I would be right on saying, so what are you doing for lunch tomorrow? Because you're not going to meet with her tomorrow.
That's right.
Should I come and meet you for lunch? Because this has got to stop.
Right.
Even if he didn't realize that's what needed to happen.
And at this point in our lives, I should have never been having lunch with her anyway. I mean, that's the bottom. That's the bottom line. If you're too close to the edge of the cliff, you could fall in. The way to prevent that from happening is to take 10 steps back.
That's exactly right.
I constantly disagree with people, in this particular case, men, because that's who I talk to most often, is they have female friends that they have lunch with, that they do this with. Boy, I tell you, that's a red flag. That is a big red flag. Yeah.
So that does lead us to our next question, which is, what about situations where there will be continued contact? What about situations that do involve work where you don't agree that the job needs to be quit? What about a family member? What about a church situation? So if both husband and wife are in agreement, and that's the first thing, if both husband and wife are in agreement that drastic measures do not need to be taken, such as leaving the job or something equally disruptive, then the couple discusses and agrees on how to handle the contact from here on out. And if there will be contact, we have two suggestions. One is to eliminate that secrecy. The spouse is told of every contact. You discuss the steps that can be taken to decrease the frequency of that contact. No more private meetings or intimate conversations. Exactly what you were talking about, Mike. You stop having lunch.
And you script those things if it happens. That sounds silly. We're adults. Should we have to do that? We believe you have to.
Yeah. It's something that I think the couple can really use, to help themselves build that hedge. But it's also, and when we say script, it may not be put down the exact words. It's just, what are we going to say if this happens? What are you going to say when this happens? Here's what I feel like I should say. How can we avoid this? Where both of you are then talking about it, and it's in the light, and you're both talking about it. And then if I were to go to work and I were to come across that, I can play out that, okay? And then I go home to Mona and say, well, I ran into her, at the water fountain or whatever.
She was still standing and I ran into her.
Okay, but see, the thing of it is that a lot of people don't look at is that not only helps with the fact that now we're keeping it all in the light, it helps Mona now to think like he's bringing this home and we're sharing it, and it's not necessarily all that comfortable to talk about this sort of thing, but it's then baby steps towards trust again. It's like me exhibiting a behavior that I'm not keeping it a secret any longer, but I am bringing it home and getting it in the light.
And
So-
you're admitting that it's inappropriate.
Yeah.
That's right.
And even if, and I'm not saying this should happen, but even if Mona beats you over the head with that information and you have a miserable time, you know what the message that she's getting is. He's willing to do that.
That's right.
Even if he gets beat over the head,
Right.
because honesty is what's most important for him in our
And
relationship.
sometimes in the early stages of recovery,
I know that.
they emotionally
Yeah.
flood. They're
Oh,
going to
yeah.
get angry. It's going to happen, and
Yeah.
you're going to bring it home. But
Yeah.
eventually, the Holy Spirit will absolutely, and I saw this happen with Mona, and I've seen it happen in so many other places. The Holy Spirit will just start prompting her, you can't continue to do that when he's bringing this stuff home. And that was the whole thing with the writing exercise as well. She would write those exercises out, and that person that she was reading about, is like, I don't want to be that person. It's just the way that God could really use to reach Mona.
He uses it for both people.
Amen.
He
people.
does. He
does.
teaches Mona that Gary's willing to tell me the truth regardless.
Yeah, I've
And
always
pretty
said
soon she won't do that again.
Yeah, I've always said it's a unilateral decision I made to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
unfaithful.
exactly.
But God is cleaning out our relationship.
That's correct.
That's
and,
right.
and there's
Yeah.
stuff for all of us to do here.
Now, I remember the moment that I was still emotionally flooding and we were still fighting, and Gary had been able to incorporate that scripture, gentle answer turns away wrath. And so when I would start screaming and throwing a temper tantrum like a 2-year-old, he would stand there mature and talk. And I remember realizing at one point, like the Holy Spirit talking to me, Mona, you've got to quit doing this.
Gary was mature.
Yes,
It's
he
hard,
does.
it's hard to believe.
Okay, so one of the things you can do, if there is contact, is eliminate secrecy.
Yeah,
The other
completely.
thing you can do is eliminate emotional intimacy. All contact is professional as the occasion requires, and each situation will be different, but it needs to be discussed between husband and wife so they both understand what contact. You cannot say it's okay if you stay at your job, but don't ever see that person or
Right.
speak a word. If that's not realistic, then they
Yeah,
can't
it's
stay
just
at that
not.
job. But you can figure out together what professional contacts
Necessary.
you can figure out together what professional contact is necessary
Right.
for the job.
And one of our facilitating couples, he has a rule that, and it seems that's the opposite of what you should do. He doesn't even talk about his family life
That's right.
at work. No, that sounds, well, wouldn't you want to tell them that you're married and you have this wonderful family? No, that starts sharing things that should be kept between you and your spouse. So he doesn't do that. A work relationship is a work relationship, and it should stay that way. It should stay that way.
Well, and sometimes when you have acknowledged that there's an emotional affair going on, that doesn't necessarily mean that your friend agrees with you.
That's right.
Your friend may still be saying nothing's happened, what's going on with you. So in eliminating that emotional intimacy, you may get some pushback, and the friend says, why? Why can't we talk anymore? And so you script that again, something like, I've realized it's inappropriate to discuss my personal life with you, and from now on we'll just focus on work-related subjects.
And it would be nice to say, Joe and I have decided that we're not
Yeah.
going to discuss this
Yeah,
anymore.
That's even better. Well, that's the end of discussion. So you can eliminate the secrets, you can eliminate the emotional intimacy. You may not be able to eliminate the sexual chemistry, but you can take the power away from a friendship that can damage your marriage. And the way you see yourself reflected in your affair partner's eyes may change. That's a good thing.
That's right.
Better to be thought of as an honorable husband or wife than as an attractive partner.